Luke 15. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbours together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep." I tell you that in the same way there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who do not need to repent. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbours together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the youngest son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields and to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to the servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the elder son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called out one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound.' The elder brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.
Well, every so often you have an experience that totally changes your view on what you think is important. So a couple of weeks ago I went to a conference. I had to stay at a hotel. And I'd been to the conference a year before, and I booked a hotel at that point. When I booked the hotel, I thought there's a couple of things that are important to me. One thing is the price. One thing is the distance away from the venue of the conference. So there's some things that are important to me, and that's how I made my decision. With those things being important to me, last year I booked somewhere which was the sweet spot in price. It was pretty cheap. That was great. It ticked that important box. And it was really close to the venue where the conference was. So it ticked those two important boxes. But let me tell you, I had the experience that totally changed what I thought was important. The room was no bigger than a matchbox. The window was broken so you couldn't shut it properly. There was a generator outside making a big racket, and someone who had been there before had left cold chips in the top drawer of the bedside cabinet. I say cold, I don't know if it would have been better if they were warm or not. It was not very nice. And that made me think, did I really get right what was important? Is the best thing, is the most important thing, cheap and close to the venue? Well, I booked again this year. I really had to rethink what I thought was important. No longer am I going to try and go for the cheapest, the closest. There's more things that are important to me now. What I used to think was important is less important. And what was unimportant to me before, like hygiene rating and things like that, that's really important to me now. I've learned something that's told me that something else is vastly important. Now, we are right at the end of our series in the Gospel of Luke. We're not at the end of Luke, but this is the last time we're going to be in Luke this year. We're finishing this series here. This series in Luke has been doing exactly that to us. It's been causing us to think differently about what we think is important. We've been hearing a lot from Luke that speaks into a world like ours, which tells us that power and status and wealth are important. And the Bible has been telling us all along, getting us to rethink, showing us that God chooses the weak, and he honours the humble and poor. What I previously thought was important, to go up in the world, is actually unimportant to God. And what God says is important in Luke, it is really something that surprises us. And today's passage is all about challenging us to another rethink. Have a look at verses 1 and 2. It tells us how this whole chapter comes about. Now, tax collectors and sinners were all gathering round to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners, eats with them." And Jesus goes on to tell 3 parables that we're going to look at, but that context is very important. Jesus is eating with tax collectors and sinners. And that's a problem, that's a scandal, that's a surprise. And it's because there's something important to God that's not important to us. When worthless people are invited to celebrate dinner parties with the Son of God, well, we need to rethink who really is worthless. We need to rethink celebrating and joy. And we need to rethink God. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Firstly, we're rethinking not who's worthless, but rethinking value. What is of value? The question on the lips of the Pharisees and teachers of the law, who are the most religious groups around, and they would have been known for being pure. Their works were good. They weren't seen to do bad things. The question on the lips of the Pharisees and teachers of the law is, why is he eating with them? The implication being that they're not worthless. You would not choose to eat with people like that because they're lower down. Their value is less. These people, tax collectors, they're not people who add to your life. You don't want them in your life because they detract from your life. Your life is better without them. They take your money. They steal. They harm. They're bad for society. We might say in today's language that they're toxic. Surely Jesus can't consider them to be worthwhile. And Jesus illustrates his answer with three parables. The first parable, he says, well, actually, supposing you had 100 sheep, but then you found that one was missing, it's obvious to you, Jesus seems to suggest, it's obvious to you that you'd go and find it. It's obvious to you that the one that's lost is still valuable. It might not be where you want it, but it hasn't lost its worth. And even more stark, the 10 coins of the woman from verse 8 onwards. The woman had 10 coins and one of them went missing. But Jesus says, well, of course, you go and find that coin that was missing. There's a little bit of detail that sometimes is in people's footnotes. It says that one of those coins was worth a day's wages. But if you lost that, you'd go and find it, wouldn't you? It hasn't lost its value. Just like the 50p's hadn't lost their value just because they were under banana skin. That lady's coin was still worth what it was worth. And that's his point. Jesus says, listen, here's why I'm eating with tax collectors and sinners, because when something's lost, it hasn't lost its worth. They are still valuable. But his third parable shows them why this is hard to accept. This is the more famous of the parables. It's often known as the prodigal son. In the third parable, it's not a sheep or a coin that's lost, but it's a person that's lost. And they're not lost because of some naive wandering like a sheep or just being mislaid like a coin. It's their own fault. Lostness in the third parable is somebody willfully doing something really bad. Have a look at verse 12. Here's what the youngest son in the parable says. Father, give me my share of the estate. It's hard for us to grasp just how disrespectful and shockingly cruel that statement is. His share of the estate is in his inheritance. He's saying, what I'm going to get when you die, I would like it now. But unfortunately, you're not dead. So I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to die. I'm just going to take my money and then get you out of my life. And most of us instinctively start to make a judgment on the youngest son at this point, don't we? He's horrible, right? He's cruel. He's manipulative. And what does he do with his wealth? He sets up a charity and feeds the poor. No, he doesn't. He squanders it. So we make a judgment on him because of that. He's rash. He's irresponsible. He's immature. And then he gets, in verse 14, what we would like to call in today's social media, he gets what people call instant karma. I don't know if you've seen on social media videos where people get what's coming to them straight away. People say that's instant karma. Picture on the screen is of a man who was shouting abuse at the car driver. He had his eyes turned on the car driver and was shouting abuse at him. Well, that wasn't very nice, was it? But he got what was coming to him because he got it right into the pole. I don't know if you've seen some yourself and someone's playing a prank on someone and it backfires. And what they went to do to shock the other person shocks them. The water that they meant to throw on the other person gets thrown on them. And people say that's instant karma. We like that. We like the idea, there's no such thing as karma, but we wish there was because we like the idea that when somebody does something bad, they deserve something bad. When you plan something bad against somebody, we think you no longer deserve to be treated right. That you should forfeit the right to be treated well. That's how the Pharisees felt about the tax collectors. That's how the older brother feels in the third parable. He says in verse 30, when he's talking to the father, the older brother says, verse 30, when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. In other words, he's forfeited the right to be treated well. He's less worthy. He's not worthy of that. Even the son himself recognizes that same principle that we think. We think he's lost his value. He thinks he's lost his value. Look what he thinks in verse 19. He plans to go home and say sorry to his father, and he says, he's going to say, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. I'm no longer worthy, he says. Is it true? Is that how it works? That when you do something really bad, you're not worthy anymore. When you're the one whose fault it is that all these bad things are happening, you lose value. You're not worth it. I think that's how it works. 3 examples, they may or may not hit home. If you were to think of giving money to a charity, I bet you a lot of us would much rather give money to a charity that helps out people who are struggling because they're victims of things outside their control. We don't really like the idea of giving to charity who helps people who are struggling because they're in a situation of their own making. People who are struggling because they themselves have squandered their wealth, lived badly, and now they're struggling. We don't want to give to a charity like that. Or another example, you might have been told that you can cut people out of your lives. You might have been told that there are some people who are good for us, and some people who are bad for us. Some people add to our lives, and some people take from our lives. Some people drain us. Some people are toxic. And so, you can cut them out, because they are not worth your time. They've lost value in your eyes. Or a third way we believe this is when you think of your own life before God. When you pause and think, are you worthy before God? What have I done to make God pleased with me? If I list all the things that I've done, if I think about where I should stand before God, I think I'm not worthy. Because I've got that in my mind. This is how it works in my mind. You do the bad things and you lose your value. And here's the scandal in the third parable. The scumbag of a son is still a son. That's the shock. He's still a son. He is still valuable. Now here's one place where we're learning that God's values are not like ours. Where what is important to us isn't important to God, and what's important to God, sadly, is not important to us. You see, people are important to God, and yet we still think that sin and past histories and willful wickedness, we think that taints a person. We think that should make someone less worthy before God. Sometimes we judge people less worthy, sometimes we judge people on the basis of status. Perhaps you're not like that. Perhaps you think, no, I would never do that. But we do judge people a lot more on the basis of their choices or their bad character. We often judge people on what they bring to us, whether they add to us or whether they take from us. How much we are going to get out of this. And we can often be like that older brother, thinking, well, now that he's taken half the inheritance, there's only half the farm left to me. And everything that the father has to spend on it now is my inheritance being squandered. Sometimes there are people who detract from your life, take away from what you would like, take away your stuff. Well, that decreases their value. But we need to rethink value. Because God values his people as precious. Even idiots. Even idiots are precious. Because they're his. But you see, instead of valuing people, the two brothers in the parable value something else above people, and that is stuff, fun, and celebrating. They both wish they could celebrate, and so we need to rethink celebration. See, the younger brother, it's evident in the parable, he wants stuff, and he wants a good time more than he wants his father. He doesn't value the father, he values his stuff. But as it turns out, so does the older brother. While the younger brother did get stuff, and he got a good time, the older brother didn't get that, and he resented it. He didn't delight in the fact that he had his father. His father went down in value, and he still wished he could have his stuff. Look at verse 29. The older son answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I can celebrate with my friends." And there it is. He doesn't value what the father values, a relationship. He values his stuff. And the father says, but we have a relationship. He says, you are always with me. And everything I have is yours. That's not enough. Both sons wanted to be away from their father. Both sons wanted the father's stuff so that they could celebrate. One of them got all he wanted, and the other didn't. Because he didn't, the older brother thought of himself as a slave. He thought he's not going to be able to find joy and happiness until he's free of the father. The value of people goes down. The value of stuff goes up. And the younger brother, well, he did try and celebrate. But he couldn't find happiness as a free man away from his father either. And yet, in all three of these parables, it's striking that there's a celebration, a real celebration, a truly happy celebration in all three parables. And it's not when people are valuing stuff, it's when people are valuing people. In all three parables, the celebration is when the lost returns home. It's funny. So if you look at the parables, I'd always thought that here's Jesus eating with tax collectors and sinners. And the Pharisees say, why are you eating with tax collectors and sinners? And he tells a parable that says, suppose you lost a sheep, but went and found it again. Surely that's why I'm eating with tax collectors and sinners, because I'm going out to try and find the lost. If you lost a sheep, you go and try and look for it. God has people wandering and coming to look for them. That is the point made. I feel that Jesus could end his parables halfway through verse 6. Here's what's going on. Jesus eats with tax collectors and sinners because he's come to search for the lost sheep. And yet, half of that parable is talking about rejoicing. It's talking about a party he has. Half of the next parable is talking about the party the woman has. And then loads of detail is mentioned in the third parable about how much they celebrate. Specifically, what goes on the younger son. His sandals, his ring, his cloak, and specifically what they eat. These parables are as much about rejoicing as they are about anything else. Because wanting celebration is not wrong. But the problem is, these sons and the Pharisees wanted to celebrate with stuff away from the Father. These parables say that celebration and joy and happiness only comes when we return to the Father. Jesus, in fact, says, when people return to God, the joy that they have in that celebration is far greater than the wild party you could have if you had all the money in the world and party to your heart's content. The joy and celebration when they celebrate what is lost is like the joy of the angels in heaven. I wonder whether we get this wrong. We think we are going to be happier away from God because we think that if we're away from God, we get to earn the right to celebrate. But the problem in this passage is that nobody earns the right to celebrate. It's given as a gift. When I'm cooking at home, I'm not great at working in a team in our kitchen, so normally I just say, look, let me do it myself. Okay? I don't want you to do anything, I don't want you to do your bits, I just want to do it all myself. So I actually prefer to shut the kitchen door and then get on with cooking myself. Now my wife, Kerry, she'll sit outside the door and she'll sit with the children and make sure no one comes in and no one offers me any help. And I'll think, well, that's really good. That's exactly how I want it. When I make the meal, I've got the joy of knowing that this is something I made all by myself. And I can celebrate what I've achieved. But if you knew my cooking and Kerry's cooking, you would say that that celebration isn't quite as good as having her help to do it. Me celebrating the meal I cooked on my own is not as good as if she'd have helped me. It's much nicer when I receive from her something that is wonderful and delicious and tasty. Whether you get to come to our house, her gravy, I think, is the best in the world. It's great to be given something, but we think we'd rather celebrate our own achievements. And that's a lie that we believe. That if we achieve things in our own strength, that's a happier place to be. The joy, the celebration that these sons wanted is by going off on their own, making their own achievements and celebrating their own achievements. Away from God, following our own rules, we think that is where satisfaction lies. And that's a lie. It seems to us that there might be something wrong in that third parable when the younger son is enjoying a banquet that he didn't deserve, while the older son is outside working the fields, missing out on a party that he did deserve. But that only feels wrong if we think that the best celebration, the best joy and satisfaction is when you earn it. But Jesus' parables say you need to rethink celebration. The best joy, the best celebration is not when you earn it, but when it's given to you free as a gift. The happiest celebration in our lives is thrown by God when we admit our weakness and our lostness. The Pharisees who see Jesus celebrating with undeserving people, they need to rethink celebration too. They think they deserve a celebration with Jesus for all they've done, but they can't seem to find joy in their own efforts. And they cannot understand why the tax collectors get the time of their life with Jesus when they didn't deserve it at all. The Pharisees need to rethink celebration. We need to rethink celebration. That our joy is not in what we earn, but it's when we come to God empty-handed. Let Him welcome us back. He throws a celebration. And that's actually always been that way. It's interesting that Jesus says at the end of the second parable, the first parable, that there's joy in heaven, more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than 99 who don't need to. You ever thought about that? Why? Surely 99 people doing a good job is a good thing. And one person doing something wrong is a bit of a blot on that. And I get that there is a feeling of getting back something you lost, but why is it that it's even better to have one person turning back to God than 99 who don't need to, also think they don't need to? Well, I think God has done it this way, because when one person turns back to God, all eyes are on God. And we get to see, showcased, what God is like, what God is truly like. And so these parables make us rethink God. You see, I think at the heart of why the younger brother and older brother value people less than stuff, at the heart of why they think that celebration is best had away from the Father, the reason why is because they've got the Father all wrong. What do they think of the Father? Well, they both think the same thing about the Father. And it's betrayed in what they say. Have a look at what the younger brother says to the Father in verse 19. Touched on it a little bit already, but have a look at verse 19. The younger brother is going to go back to the Father. And he is going to say, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. He thinks his status before the Father is based on whether he's been good or not. The older brother thinks exactly the same. Have a look at verse 29. The older brother says, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat, so I could celebrate with my friends. What they both think is that the Father is going to treat them as their actions deserve, because they think the Father is a taker, not a giver. I'm doing some study online at the moment. I attend online lectures, and we have homework to do every week. And I try and do the homework, try and be good. I think that's only right to do, it's only fair, and that'll help me learn. But sometimes I don't quite get to do it all. And one time I said to someone, mentioned to someone, I didn't get to do all the homework. And they said, well, are you nervous now to go to the lecture? Are you going to be in trouble? Are you going to be able to say that you didn't do it, or are you just going to keep that to yourself? Are you nervous to admit before the lecturer that you got it wrong, that you didn't do it all? You didn't do what you were supposed to? And now my answer to that is going to depend on whether I think my lecturer is a taker or a giver. See, is my lecturer going to be a taker and saying, I prepared this for you, I gave you the homework, I'm trying to get you to do this, the least you can do is do your homework for me. You're letting the class down. You need to be good enough to carry this on. Is he going to say that? Because he's a taker. He wants me to do it all. Or is he a giver? In fact, he's a giver. He says, well, where are we up to? Let's see how we can help you. I want you to be helped. I want you to grow in this. So let's see what we can help you with. Was there anything, is there a reason? Was it difficult? Was it too difficult? That's okay. I want to help you. When you're stood before someone and think that they are a taker, of course you're nervous. Of course you want to just say, like, okay, I'm unworthy, so don't treat me like as if I'm worthy. You can treat me like a servant. Or you might think, no, I am worthy, and you ought to treat me like your favourite son. But that's if you think he's a taker. But if you think he's a giver, well then I think you start to become like him. The scandal that the older son felt, he thought the father was a taker. He said, I've given you all you could have wanted, so why are you rewarding the one who doesn't deserve anything? The Pharisees think that God is a taker. They see the Son of God eating with worthless people, and they think, what can they possibly be giving to God? They haven't done enough. God wants more than what they've given. But God is a giver. God says no one is devalued by their sin. Because he's not standing there wishing that they would give him stuff, wishing that they would do more righteousness. God's not there with a list, totting up things. If you hear about Santa this Christmas and about his naughty and nice list and all the ways he sees what your children do, well, what a horrible person he is. He wants you to be good for him. The Father, God, he doesn't look at us through the lens of what we've done for him. No one is devalued, worthless because of their sin. No one is greater because of their goodness. And God is a giver. And so that's exactly where we'll find celebration and joy. It's a lie to think that by wandering away from the giver, you'll find more satisfaction. That is not what happens to the Son. And so rethinking God is key to how we can become more like him, to have our values matching his. We said at the beginning that we've learned in Luke that the values of God are topsy-turvy compared to ours. What he thinks is important, we've not been thinking is important. And here's a chance for us to try and match up with that. Not be good enough, but start to think like him, to place our values as his. See, if we want to rethink value, rethink celebration, if you want to truly believe and live like somebody, and live as if people are more important than stuff, even sinful people, even people who take and hurt, and if you want to truly believe and live like your fullest joy will be found in knowing God, not in pursuing what's not God, then we need to know this about God. He's not a taker. He's a giver. He's a lavish giver. In the story, Jesus describes the Father bringing the best robe, the ring on the finger, the sandals on the feet, and the fattened calf. You can't get any more lavish than that. That is everything that could be pulled, all the stops that could be pulled out in this celebration. He is a giver. That's in the story, but in reality, God gives us more than just robes and sandals and meals. See, he becomes the searcher of the sheep. Jesus is the searcher of the sheep. As he tells these parables, we're only a few pages away from where Jesus says that he came to seek and save the lost. Jesus is later going to identify himself as the searcher of the sheep. Because Jesus isn't talking about an abstract idea of God far away. Jesus was living out what it means to be a God who does search his sheep for his sheep. Just as he sat around the table with the worst of the worst, he was there as their searcher and their saviour. Because the lost have never stopped being valuable to him. But what we haven't touched on is the fact that even just as the younger son took half of the farm and squandered it, he devalued the farm, he took away from the father, there was a cost to pay. Everyone else was worse off because of it. The father had to pay that cost. And so it is with us and God. As we seek happiness away from God, there is a cost to pay for that. But Jesus calls people to the Father, knowing that he will pay the cost. Jesus invites us to return to him, knowing that the cost will be dealt with by him. Because a few weeks later, Jesus the Son gives up his sonship for being a servant. He washes the disciples' feet like a servant. He dies a criminal's death, and he takes the punishment so that we could not be treated as servants, but as sons and daughters. It's viewing God like that that's going to help us become more like him. He is such a giver that he would not withhold his own son to make us sons and daughters in his family. Because God values what we don't. And we have been valuing what he doesn't. But when we meet him in the person of Jesus Christ, when we meet him as our searcher, the saviour, the one who bears the cost, when we see him as the giver that he is, and we can come back to the Father, and when we don't beg to be servants, but we know that God the giver celebrates us as sons and daughters, well, take that. Drink that. Remind yourself of that. Delight in that. See God for who he really is. Because seeing God like that is what we need to value what he values. To find true joy and true celebration in his house. Let's